Over the past few years, things have rapidly declined within the U.S. military. Physical fitness has severely diminished. Obesity rates have gone increasingly higher as years gone by. And the COVID-19 pandemic only made things dramatically worse. For around a year to a year and a half, there was no more PT tests, no height and weight, no sort of assessments at all. In fact, most individuals did not even come to work. There was no PT, no anything. And with everyone being banned from being outside or doing anything productive, individuals were forced to stay in their barracks or at their homes and eat food, play video games, order takeout, and do whatever they could do. Often it was threatened that you would receive UCMJ, Article 15s, if you're caught outside of your home doing anything. This only exacerbated the issue dramatically. Making things worse, as the Army attempted to implement the new ACFT, or Army Combat Fitness Test, to replace the old, outdated APFT, Army Physical Fitness Test, there were no record PT tests for around 2 years. This meant that individuals could take diagnostic APFTs and ACFTs, but whether they maxed the test with perfect scores, or if they failed it entirely, there would be no difference. No positive rewards for those passing, and no punishment for those failing. This meant that individuals that were highly unphysically fit and generally did not pass height and weight standards and could not pass a PT test would still get promoted. These individuals would become non-commissioned officers and begin to lead men. And they too would instill their terrible sense of discipline into their men, thus creating more bad habits, more undisciplined soldiers, and more individuals that don't care about their physical fitness and don't understand that our line of work is a game of life and death, where physical fitness can decide the length of your life and the lifespan of your friends. And now, due to all this, we have dramatically increased obesity rates, a very weakened force that is only going to get worse unless we make a dramatic change. So the question arises, what can we do? Well, the dining facilities, or DFACs, on post generally serve highly unhealthy food. Soldiers are generally restricted from consuming healthy items in mass, i.e. only being authorized to have one protein source and one serving of the protein source. However, they can load up as many potatoes or rice as they want. No restrictions on carbohydrates or fat content, but protein is limited. This means that if you want to go in for breakfast and get 3 biscuits and gravy and multiple cups worth of fresh potatoes, that's fine. But if you want to ask for 3 boiled eggs, you're asking a bit much. That's completely unauthorized. It is illegal. It will not be done. You can only have 2. And this is where a major point of friction happens to be. A lot of soldiers do live in the barracks. They are single soldiers. Thus, they rely on the DFAC to provide them food. And when you're constantly being forced to choose unhealthy options, what can you do? This means soldiers that are having to pay for DFAC food need to go and buy their own food, which in the end is quite costly for the soldier. Not only that, how are they going to cook it? Most soldiers are not authorized to have cooking abilities within their barracks rooms. Any hot plate is not allowed unless they hide it. Most barracks do not have kitchens or any sort of functional stoves or anything of the sort, minus a microwave. So how can they meal prep? Well, they can't. The only thing they can do is secretly cook in their room and toss things in their mini refrigerator that likely can't hold more than 2 to 3 days worth of food, and that's not very sustainable. If they were to avoid breaking regulations, they'd have to go to a friend's house that's married and cook there. Or they'd have to pay for a meal subscription service and utilize that. Either way, these options are not sustainable and they're not realistic for soldiers to use. So, they're stuck with what they've got, which is poor options. When we consider morning physical training, this is another point of friction. Morning PT sounds great. It should be great. You get up in the morning first thing and go knock out a good gym session or a good run, something productive. But instead, we're held down by outdated PRT, physical readiness training manuals, because unfortunately, although the Army has implemented H2F, holistic health and fitness, that has improved doctrine regarding physical fitness, leaders fail to recognize this and fail to implement it. they still rely on the PRT manual, even though this is outdated and should no longer be used. Even with that, H2F has its flaws, though it is better. Individuals will unfortunately force the soldiers to conduct PRT drills in the morning, which involves stretching for about 15 to 20 minutes, to then go conduct PT for about 30 minutes before they have to do a cool-down drill for another 15 minutes. This means that you're getting about an hour of stretching and about 15 to 20 minutes of actual training in the morning. This is highly counterproductive. And unfortunately, the stretches utilized in H2F and PRT are not highly useful. There's still an extreme level of injuries within the military, namely lower body, knee, and spinal are the primary sources of injury for the military, especially in combat arms. Which then leads us into the next problem. Leaders are often uneducated in physical fitness. What they suggest doing, and by suggest I mean force their soldiers to do, is generally unhealthy. And usually it's one-sided. If a leader is a good runner, he'll want to run every day because there's a stigma about looking weak in front of your men, so he'll only do what he's good at. If your leader is really strong but a terrible runner, he'll only have you go to the gym. So in the end, you become a very one-dimensional athlete. You either run every day of the week in some form or fashion, or you lift every day of the week in some form or fashion, or you're doing calisthenics every day of the week. And in the end, this is not sustainable either, and it doesn't really meet the requirements for the new PT test, which involves deadlift, run, sprint, drag, carry, all these other, high-intensity exercises. Doubly with the deadlift requiring such a high degree of core strength, that's something that needs to be worked on, and leaders do not recognize this. Oftentimes, if you request to go to the gym in the morning, you're told no. That gym is not authorized during PT times. So that means now that you and your men have to go on a run in the morning or do some sort of cardio or do calisthenics, which has limited application in real world, and then work a full day of work. And then once you're done, you then have to go to the gym to conduct strength training to compensate for what you failed to get in the morning when is your designated time to conduct training. So now you pretty much have zero free time. So although some people don't have a problem with it, myself included, as I like to spend my time training, many people don't. A lot of people have families or they want downtime. They want to decompress and play video games like you see me doing here. Or they want to go out to eat with friends, something of the sort. They don't want to spend every waking minute of their lives either at work or preparing to be at work. So then what? Well, these guys end up not getting the training they require, and they go home and have a beer or a pizza and call it a day. And as leaders fail to monitor individuals' diets, they'll go to the gas station, the shopettes on post, and get multiple tornadoes or cheeseburgers or biscuits and high-calorie energy drinks, and then what? You end up having soldiers consuming 1,000 calories in the morning to start the day, and your 2-mile run at a 15-minute pace isn't going to burn off the calories that they consume. So you already have a problem. And then by the time lunch rolls around, they'll do the same thing. They'll go eat cheeseburgers, they'll get another energy drink or two, and then by dinner, well, it's time for them to go home and probably have a couple of beers. In the end, you have an infantryman that's consumed around 5,000 calories in a day, and minus his metabolism, his BMR, he's probably only burned an additional 200 to 300 calories that day. Overall, it's terrible. It's a bad condition to be in, and we're doing nothing to fix it. If you combine these things with the current culture of the United States, which is mostly being on cell phones, playing on the computer, playing video games, being very lackadaisical and lacking discipline, this is terrible. So these individuals likely come from that background before the military, and then they get in, and at best they're busting out a 2 to 5 mile run and doing some push-ups and sit-ups. And then they spend the rest of their day doing little to nothing, because there's no physical training conducted throughout the day in most units. Some do it, of course. I'm not going to say no unit does it. Whenever I have the chance, I make sure my guys go to the gym. But most don't do that. They'll sit around, and when there's nothing to do at work, they'll just play on their phones. And this leads to more problems. You have guys that are just sitting around all day doing nothing, and then they go home and do nothing again. And unfortunately, leaders often do not do anything to rectify this issue. They don't want to take the time required to study the human body, to study psychology, and to try to produce solutions. They don't want to take the time to monitor their soldiers and be involved in their lives and see if they're stress eating, which most do, and how they can mitigate that. They don't want to check in and see if people are depressed and if that's causing them to eat poorly, because, again, that's a weird stigma. If you're depressed, well, it's generally made into a joke. No one wants to legitimately say that they have a problem. It's normally made as a passing joke, like, oh, well, gosh, I might just hang myself later, and oh, well, me too, ha, and it's good there. And that's, again, unfortunate, is these psychological problems can lead to individuals eating terribly and leading very sedentary lives. That's at no fault of their own, of course. I'm not blaming the individual for that. That's a natural reaction. If you're catastrophically depressed and your cortisol levels are through the roof, you're probably not going to want to go to the gym to squat a bunch of weight. You're probably going to want to go home, have a glass of whiskey, play a video game, play on the phone, and go to bed. And get ready for another likely stressful day at work. Because, unfortunately, work is quite stressful more often than not. And more often than not, it shouldn't be. But that's just how things go. Another major point that we have to consider is that the war is over. We haven't been in conflict for some time now, not a real conflict. Most of the action settled down in the Middle East a few years ago. And now that we've pulled out, there's really no hope for a deployment at this time. So because of that, a lot of soldiers are demoralized. They don't see a point in being motivated to fight and win. They don't see a point in being physically fit or being ready to deploy. Because to them, it's not going to happen. Even when I was going to Afghanistan in 2018, many people thought we still weren't going to go when we were boarding the plane to fly out. And then when we landed in Camp Buer in Kuwait, many individuals said, well, we're probably going to be stuck here. They're not going to actually send us to Afghanistan. We'll never do anything. And then we get to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, and the same thing. Well, we'll probably just stay here. There's no way they're going to send us to a combat zone. And then we go to Kabul, Afghanistan for the duration of our deployment. And then everyone says, well, we're likely not going to go on missions. There's no way we'll do anything productive. There's nothing to do. And then we're running missions frequently. The next thing is, well, we're never going to do anything too hard. There's no danger. The war is over. And then we have insider attacks where people are injured and people die. And then what? Well, they think, well, it won't happen to me. It's not my problem. And this attitude is only worse now that the conflict is actually over. No one thinks it's going to happen. Everyone's under the impression that they have infinite time and that they're never going to deploy. And if they do, it'll just be to some garbage fob somewhere playing on your phone or pulling tower guard doing nothing, which is generally what's going on in Iraq and Syria right now. And unfortunately, with the Russian-Ukraine situation right now, although we should be ready for that, we should be prepared for that fight, no one really seems to care. Leaders are not training their men in their battle drills. They're not making sure their individuals are physically fit, mentally driven to win. No one's trying. Most leaders are not deployed at this point. Quite a few E5s and E6s have never been to a combat zone. They've only done rotations to maybe Poland or Germany or Korea. Thus leading to them not understanding the significance of being properly prepared for a combat environment. And what can that mean for our men? That means that they're going to get led by someone that doesn't even understand what they're doing or the consequences. And they aren't going to understand the consequences until it's far too late. And that's why it's imperative that we try to find a solution here. And it starts in the morning. The battle does start in the morning. We need to slow down this time that we spend doing useless stretches. I'm not saying stretching is useless. We should stretch. We should warm up, yes. But we should limit that. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes of PRT. If you're going to go on a run, you don't need to do the bent leg body twist, and you don't need to do the squat bender, okay? If you don't know what those are, just look them up. All you need to do is get a quick little light warm-up jog in, maybe shake the legs around, and then you're good to go. You don't need to do all this. And likewise, if you go and your little 2-mile run, you likely don't need to do the extended flex. It's probably not practical. Is the overhead arm pull very practical in that situation? Probably not. But yet, we do that. We need to cut out the extra fluff that's meant to kill time. Oh, there's an hour and a half for PT. How can I make an hour and a half go by? Well, we can stretch for 30 minutes, and then we'll jog really slow for 30 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll stretch for 30 minutes and bullshit and smoke and joke, and then once the bell goes off, we'll go home. And then, breakfast time. We have to eliminate that culture. We have to take time to better ourselves and better our men. That's critical. And if we're not doing that, we're failing our comrades. We're failing ourselves. And worse, we're failing the families of these people too. If we are to enter a combat environment, what are we going to do if our lack of training gets someone hurt or killed? Are we going to take the blame for that? Are you, as a leader, going to write that letter to that mother or father, husband or wife, and say, well, I'm sorry, he likely wouldn't have had this happen if I gave a shit. If I had actually put effort into training him instead of letting him play on his phone all day and just settle for a 2-mile run and go home, he would have been okay. You're likely not going to say that. The odds are low. Maybe you will, but you probably won't. This is something we need to prepare for. We need to mitigate this because it's frankly unacceptable. We're going to lose people if we don't make things better. The time is short. At any given time, we can enter a conflict. We're never more than a few seconds away from another 9/11 or another Pearl Harbor. And it is imperative that we fight the culture that we're in right now. Just because most of the country does not seem to care about its physical fitness and they're worried about other things does not mean that's our problem. We are war fighters. Our role is to be capable of fighting and winning in any environment, no matter what. Our role is not to sit around and be social media influencers or play on our phones or do strange dances while in uniform. Our job is to fight and win. And that's violence. That can be dangerous. That can be a terrible situation to find yourself in. But if we aren't ready for it, the situation will be dramatically worse than it would be if we were. Take time, learn how the body works, learn how the mind works. Make yourself a capable warfighter, and make your men capable warfighters. Their lives depend on it. Do not fail your comrades. That's all I got for now. I'll link some studies below that are worth your time to read regarding this subject. Additionally, I have 3 videos up on my channel currently regarding nutrition in the military. I highly suggest you take a look at them as it may educate you, and you could use it to educate your men as well. Or at least get some sort of information that you might not have already had that you might find useful. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you found it productive. I'll see you.
First of all, 75% or more, a little bit more actually, of the civilians who wanted to join the Army were not qualified to do so. 75% of the 17 to 24-year-olds that wanted to join the Army were not qualified, and the number one reason was because they were obese. Of the 25% that could join the Army, what we found on the first day of basic training was that about 60% of them could not pass the PT test that we gave on the first day. And that was 1 minute of push-ups, 1 minute of sit-ups, and a 1-mile run. Now that's not a difficult test.
1 out of every 3 young adults is overweight or obese in the U.S. It's a health epidemic that's now affecting the U.S. military.
Since the military tends to recruit from that population, specifically the 17 to 24-year-olds, it's starting to impact our recruitment pool.
Retired Lieutenant General Thomas Spohr insists while America's obesity problem is not as drastic among U.S. troops, it is still weighing them down.
The percent of overweight soldiers, service members, about 8 to 10% typically, and that's a problem for the military.